In this video, we shall begin to talk about Chapter 3, Activity 2. This will be a sample case study illustration for you on how to complete your case study. So, quickly, we look at the context of the study. The data set contained in the hospital.mtw file was collected on 137 patients who were admitted into the hospital to cater to their health problems. A major cause for concern for most patients admitted for care into the hospital is the total amount of money charged to the accounts at the end of the hospital stay. Now, some of the variables on which measurements were collected were quantitative and some were qualitative. At this point, we may ask, what data are we talking about? It's the dataset hospital.mtw. So we might be prompted to want to take a look at this dataset. This dataset should be contained in your weekly folder or in some other folder that your instructor might have pointed out in the instructions for the case study. So for me, I have stored it right here. So I have the hospital dataset. So I'm going to double click on it to open the document in Minitab. So now that the document is open, I can see a couple of variables. I can see 1 to 11 variables. Leave status. By the time the person was leaving, did the person die or leave before leaving the hospital? How long in days did the person stay in the hospital? How many days did the person spend in the intensive care unit, 0s or 1? What is the age of the patient, the sex of the patient? What type of payer for charges does the patient have? Is it care? Is it HMO? Is it other? How much was due in total charges at the end of the stay? Drug charges, lab charges, imaging charges, and respiratory care charges. So we observe that some of the variables are missing, but that is not a problem. Probably the person just didn't have any respiratory care or the values were not imputed outrightly. So how do we want to carry on with our analysis of this data set? Let's go back to our drawing board. Our goal here is to use some of the graphical and numerical methods that we have learned so far to summarize data while digging out relevant nuggets of information, such as what factors of variables are useful in predicting how much in total charges are due to the patient's account at the end of the hospital stay. Now, in order to drive our exploration, each of the following questions will be very useful in driving our analysis. First, how would you describe a typical patient at the hospital? Remember, when we use the word typical, we're talking about measures of center. And the 3 measures of center we have mentioned in the previous video are the mean, the median, and the mode. To recap quickly, we use the mean and the median for quantitative or numerical variables, whereas we use the mode for qualitative variables, whether nominal or ordinal. So, in order to answer this question, I am going to split the categorical variables, which is leave status, then you have sex, and you have what? Principal payer. Each of these variables is a categorical variable that splits one individual from the other by separating them into groups. So how do I generate this frequency distribution for strictly the qualitative variables? I will go into Minitab. So here I am in Minitab. I will go to Statistics and then click on Tables, tally individual variables, and I only want the categorical variables, which are leave status, and I want sex, and I also want the principal payer. What type of principal payer does the person have? So if I like, I can generate counts and percents if I like, or just the counts for simplicity. So click on OK, and immediately you have the tally. If you would like to copy this, you can always click on this drop-down arrow and copy as a picture, and you'll be able to paste in whatever document you're working on. Probably Word document, most likely. So that's, I can take this result back into my working folder. My working desk, and immediately what you quickly observe is that I can tell a couple of very important information in the data. Most of those who came to the hospital actually lived throughout their stay at the hospital. Only 9 patients were lost. Quite tragic. And then for sex, there were more females than males. And then for principal payers, considerably, many of them have a principal payer called care. That might be Medicare or thereabout, but I'm not sure. Or some other kind of care. But what we know that is based on that data, majority of them were cared for. So we would report in our report, we would say that a typical patient at this hospital actually lived using the mode. And a typical patient was a female, and a typical patient had a principal care payer. So now that we're done with the qualitative variables, we would like to go to the quantitative variables. In this case, the quantitative variables are length of stay, ICU, age, total charges, and all of these fun variables. So let's generate the statistics for them. So we go into Minitab and do that. So what you want to note is that our goal here is to generate this report in Minitab. All right, so here we are in Minitab. I will go into statistics, basic statistics. This time, I will not go to tables. For quantitative variables, I will go to display descriptive statistics. Click on that, and then I'm going to grab all the, you observe that the only variables it allows you to have here are strictly only the quantitative variables. Minitab has some inherent sense of intelligence in order to be able to detect which ones are numeric. And if you look right here, you will see that there's a T here, which means this is qualitative, most likely, because it's represented, its values are represented by words, but there is no T here, which means this is not text, rather it is numeric. And you observe that this is already here. We have length of stay here. What I would like to do is to grab all of this. So I'll press down the control button. You can just drag through and then click on select, and it will select all of the variables for you. Then for statistics, what do I want? I want the mean, but I don't want the standard error. Since this is default, since it is checked by default, I'm going to uncheck it. And then I want the standard deviation, I want the first quartile, I want the median, I want the third quartile, I want the interquartile range. I don't want the mode for quantitative variables, no. I want the minimum, the maximum. I would like the skewness too. I don't want the number of non-missing. I do not want the number of missing. These are the only variables I want, and those are the ones I'm going to pick. So click on OK and click on OK. And what you have is the summary statistics of all the variables in one spot. I can click on the drop-down arrow to copy as a picture and paste it in whatever document or report I'm generating. So back to our own report. How do we report this? First of all, remember With quantitative variables, are we going to report the mean or the median? That will depend on the skewness of the distribution. What you observe is that based on what we did last, most of the skewness are either greater than 1 or lesser than -1, which means none of this is symmetric. Since none of them is symmetric, we're not going to use the mean at all. Rather, the typical values to be reported would be the median. So this would be what our reports will be. So how do I capture all of this in my reports? I would say that a typical patient at the hospital, I would say again that a typical patient at the hospital was a female patient, because that's the mode, who had a principal care payer, because that's the mode, the one that has the highest count, and lived throughout the course of the stay. That is because that is the modal value. The modal value is the value of the categorical variable that has the highest count. And so I would continue with my report here, that lived throughout the course of the stay at the hospital based on the facts here. And then coming into the arena for quantitative variables, the patient also stayed in the hospital for length of stay for an average of 4 days. Remember, I am reporting the median because all of these variables are all highly skewed. For 4 days, with a median, an average of no days in the ICU, and was about 78 years old and had a total of $5,449 in total charges, which included also drug charges of $239.50, $655.90, and kind of build off something similar to that. So I won't read all of this to you because that will be a little bit boring, but you get the sense of what this analysis or report generation is all about. So with that, we can go on to the next question. The next question is, what is the ratio of female to male? In other words, I don't just want just the counts. Can you generate the relative frequencies? So let's see. In order to generate this, I will go back to my Minitab and I would like to do some analysis on the variable sex. So I'll go to stats and I want to generate counts and percentages. So I'll go to tables, tally individual variables, and all I want is just the variable here, which represents gender, and I want the counts, so make sure you click, make sure this is checked, and make sure this is also checked. And then click on OK, and it generates how many patients are female, how many patients are male, and the percentage. So slightly, we can say this is almost an even distribution of sex in this case. So back to our working document. So we have what? A total of 70 out of 137 sampled patients, which represents about 51% of the total number of sampled patients are female. And that answers that question. Compared to the number of males, we can say that there is about approximately or roughly an equal number of both sexes in the sampled data set. The next question we want to answer is, out of all patients, what was the average total amount charged to the account? So the emphasis here is on the total charge to the account. Again, the emphasis here is on the total charge to the patient's account. At this point, we will need to analyze or generate a summary report for the total charges variable. So we go into Minitab and click on Start, go to Basic Statistics, and then Graphical Summary. And all we want to discuss for now is total charges. Click on OK, and that helps us to generate this chart. What we can immediately see here is that this is definitely right skewed. There are some outliers based on the reports from the box plot, and we can see that there's a particular, there are many instances when the mean and the median are not equal. So with that said, let's go back to the report. So one thing we can quickly tell here is that since the distribution is symmetric, the correct typical value to report is the median. And so that is what I have down here. So the appropriate average of interest or the appropriate typical total charge is $5,418.90. Then another thing we can tell from the 5-number summary is that the minimum charge in this data set is $1,468.50, and 25% of the data of the charges is between $1,468.50 and $3,756.20. 50% lie between this range, and 75% lie between this range. The maximum total charge in this sample data is $40,231.30. So that concludes that quick analysis on the total charges for the hospital patients. Now, the next question we want to answer is, out of those who are male, what was the average total charged to the account? So that means that sex-wise, we would like to see the averages for the both sexes. So, to do that, we will go into Minitab. I'm going to close out of this and go into statistics, basic statistics, and we'd like to display descriptive statistics. In this case, based on the question, we're interested in total charge split by male or female. So the analysis is going to be on total charges, and I want I would like Minitab to group them by sex. And then click on statistics. Which one do I want? Do I want just the mean, the median, and all of that? So I'm going to keep all of these as is, mean, standard deviation. I like the skewness too, so be sure to include the skewness, the median, and I'm going to click on OK and OK. So based on the skewness here, I can tell that this is 1.64 and this is 4. So these are definitely highly skewed variables for each of the different levels or the different categories of sex. So I will definitely be reporting the median. So in this case, I will go back in and say that on average, that the male have a median charge of $5,499 and the females have an average of $5,163. Now, the next question we want to answer is, do patients who stayed longer in the hospital tend to pay higher total charges on average? This is a case where we are considering length of stay in the hospital with total charges. In order to check if there is an association between these two numeric variables, take note, they are both quantitative or inherently numerical. One of the very first things we do is to compute what we call a correlation coefficient, also called the Pearson correlation coefficient. How do we do that in Minitab? Between these two variables, length of stay and total charges. We go into Minitab, we go to statistics, basic statistics, and way down here, you have correlation. Click on correlation, And we're about to analyze length of stay. Double click on this and then total charges. And then click on OK. And it generates an output for us. You can always copy this as a picture if you like and paste it in your report. Now, for the Pearson correlation here, which is 0.772, going back to our page, what does this mean? This means that 77.2%, because if you multiply this by 100%, you get 77.2%. So what this means is that 0.772 is very close to 1. Remember, this is same thing as 77.2%, which is very close to 100%, which is 1. So we can say that there is a moderately significant association between how much you are charged at the end of the day and your length of stay at the hospital based on the data set that we have. Another question we would like to answer is the kind of relationship between total charges and length of stay. The Pearson correlation coefficient only talks about the strengths of the relationship. What it leaves out is what is the nature of the relationship. First of all, what we observe is there are other tools that can be used. And such a tool that can be used here is what we call the scatter plot. In this scatter plot, we also generate an equation depending on the pattern we see. What pattern we see here is very, very linear in nature. And it shows that on average, as length of stay increases, the total charges also what? Increases. So, how do we generate this plot? We go into Minitab and we go into Statistics, go to Regression and Fitted Line Plot. Click on this and then which variable is on the y-axis? That is, which variable depends on the other. Total charge is what depends on your length of stay. Keep this default option and click on OK, and it generates that plot for you. So taking that plot, you can always right-click on this and copy the graph if you want and paste it in your report. So we go back in here. Now, what does this mean? The trend we see here is approximately a positive linear relationship. Positive in the sense that it has a positive slope. Remember, raising up your right hand, it looks like this. This indicates a positive slope. Raising up your left hand will be a negative slope. So there is a positive, in this case, linear. It can follow a trend of a line, relationship between total charges and length of stay at the hospital. This means on average that as the length of stay increases, as it increases, so does what? Total charges also what? Increases. And this is consistent with what is obtainable in many real-life instances. Then, what does this mean? In particular, the slope right here, the number beside your length of stay. This is very similar to what you do in linear algebra, when in college algebra, when you have total charges is m, the slope, your length of stay is x plus b. Do you remember the famous y equals mx plus b? So this begins to tell you that this is the slope. The slope indicates that when it is positive, because of the positive slope, that as every time length of stay increases by 1 day, total charges would respond with an increase of $1,354. So the final question we want to answer in this case study is, are there any variables that are associated with how much in total charges a patient is obligated to pay at the end of the hospital stay, the first thing you realize is earlier we computed the correlation or the strength of relationship between length of stay, how long you stayed at the hospital, and the total charges. The big question we have not answered is it only length of stay that is correlated with the total charges? And that is the question that we are trying to answer here. So that means we need to compute more correlations. How do we go about that? We go into Minitab, go into statistics, go to basic statistics, and we're going to go into correlation. By default, Minitab would only populate this space with only number values or numeric values. It will not let you use categorical variables, which of course wouldn't make so much of any sense. So I'm going to drag all of this, or if you like, you can pick them one after the other. In order to drag, all you have to do is click on the very first one and hold down your finger on the mouse and use and drag down, and then click on select. Well, in this case, I don't want it to display p-values. Check that, excuse me. So I'm going to check this. Why is that so? Oh, that's because this is not well selected. So I'm going to select this again. So we're going to start that again. So go to statistics, basic statistics, and then we're going down to correlation. I would like to delete what I have there. And right now I'm going to drag and release that and then select. And I don't want it to display p-values, so I'm going to make sure this is not checked. Make sure it is unchecked. Click on OK, and it generates all of the pairwise correlations. You can also copy this, copy as a picture, and you can paste it in your report. Now, back in my own report, what I observe is this. I am interested in variables that are associated with total charges, which means I will look for where total charges is, and I will also look for where total charges is. So in this case, we've seen this number before. This is how strong the relationship of total charges is with length of stay. So in this case, I can tell that I have a 77.2% strength of relationship between length of stay and total charges. Then I have, this is about 6.9%, that is really weak. This is 11.4%, this is also weak. Don't worry about the negative signs. We're actually looking at the positive, the absolute values. Then again, for total charges here, it also relates with what? Drug charges. This is 81.9%, larger than 77.2% that we saw earlier. And then for total charges versus lab charges, we have 84.1%, and this is 53.3% with imaging charges, and a thumping 87.1% for respiratory charge, which means that beyond length of stay, total charges can be reasonably predicted or very, very much associated with whether you got a respiratory charge or you did not. And in fact, it is the variable that has the highest association with total charge. So, to answer the question, which quantitative variable has the strongest association with how much in total charges a patient is obligated to pay at the end of the hospital stay, the correct answer will be RT charge. It is the one whose correlation is the highest. Now, the next question is, how would you predict the amount in total charges charged to a patient's account for the current data set? And how reliable is your prediction? In order to do that, again, we are going to generate a regression analysis of total charges with this RT charge, which is the one it has the highest strength of association with. And to do that, we go into our mini tab. We go into stats, we go to regression, and then fitted. This time, I am interested in how total charges respond to. So in case this is empty when you get in there, I'm going to delete. Click in this box and press total charges, and it's also automatically going to fall in this region and saying, hey, you want me to check what total charges depends on. What is that thing you want me to check for? I want to check if it depends on respiratory charge, and I want to know the relationship. So click on OK, and it generates this fine plot for you. We have seen this plot before, and we can see that this is approximately also a positive linear trend. We can see an outlier somewhere here. And so that is definitely, you can over this. This is the case where the charges on the far extreme, the total charges is about $40,231, and the respiratory charge for this individual was $8,792.50. So this is a linear relationship, definitely. And we can see that we can also copy this and also take it into your report. So going back to my report, how do I interpret this? So based on the sample data set, it is evident that respiratory therapy charge has the greatest suspected level of association with total charges paid at the end of the hospital visit. If you look at this value right here, that is the value 75.7%, which is approximately 76%. In order to answer the question, how reliable is your prediction? This number right here tells me the degree of reliability of my prediction, and that is that there is a 76% likelihood or chance that your respiratory charge can explain why you have that much in total charges. That is a pretty strong, reliable variable to use to predict how much the person would pay at the end of their stay in the hospital. With that, I would say I will put a moderately strong belief in using respiratory charge to predict total charges.